Hi. So unfortunately, I don't get to eat what I work on, which is kind of a bummer, but that's okay. There we go. So if you're growing forage, if you're a grazer, your goal is probably to produce as much forage as possible, produce as much high quality forage as possible, and to produce that forage consistently from one year to the next. There's some challenges though. We don't want to spend a whole lot of money on inputs or investments in technology if we don't have to. Right? And so we want management strategies, forage management strategies that are inexpensive, ideally, not necessarily dependent on chemical inputs and relatively simple to implement. And I'm going to talk about a series of experiments here, and I'm going to gloss over a lot of the details of those experiments. And I'm just going to present some of the kind of highlights of those experiments. But if you're interested in the details of exactly what we did to get the data that I'm going to show you, I'll be around for a few minutes after this. So please do feel free to come talk to me. There's another challenge, and this one's really outside of our hands to some degree, and that's unfavorable, variable, or extreme weather that might reduce our ability to produce high quality forage and to produce that on a consistent basis. Right? So not only do we want management strategies that increase productivity, but ideally they'd allow us to extend the growing season when that growing season might be highly variable, and that are resilient or stable regardless of what the weather conditions might be from one year to the next. So that would be ideal. And one approach that we feel might be a potential solution to these challenges is the use of forage cultivar mixtures. So the idea is relatively simple. For example, instead of planting seeds that are all a single cultivar or a single variety, right? We want to see what would happen if half of those seeds belong to one cultivar and half belong to another, or that mixture is made up of 3 or 4 or 10 cultivars. Now we're not talking about species mixtures here. We're talking about a single species, but mixing the cultivars within that seed mix. So that's the idea. So why do we think that cultivar mixtures might be a strategy for enhancing forage productivity and dealing with some of the weather variation that we tend to see? So consider a single cultivar. So if you're growing a single cultivar in monoculture, maybe this is recommended by the seed company, that cultivar is going to have some level of tolerance to environmental conditions. And at some environmental condition, it's going to grow at its optimal rate, right? But we know that the environmental conditions can change from year to year, right? And if those environmental conditions are optimal, then we might expect our productivity is going to be optimal. But if environmental conditions are less than optimal, it's a bad growing season for whatever reason, right? Then our productivity might be low. And so if the environment's highly variable, then we might expect to see highly variable forage production from year to year. Now consider what would happen if we had 3 cultivars, right? So again, we've got the same original cultivar, but now we have 2 additional cultivars that have slightly different tolerances and responses to the environment, right? So now we've effectively increased our potential growing season, right? We've potentially extended the growing season and potentially increased productivity, but we've also made it more likely that regardless of what the weather conditions might be from one year to the next, at least one of the cultivars in this mixture is going to respond favorably, and so that we should expect more stable productivity from one year to the next. So that's the hypothesis. That's the idea, at least. And so that's what we're trying to test. Is this actually what we see when we apply these techniques? Right? So this is a way of dealing with climate uncertainty. Right? So we think that there's several possible benefits of using cultivar mixtures in forage systems. One's kind of the immediate term benefit of just increasing forage productivity and forage production in a growing season. And then there's this longer term potential benefit of increasing the stability of forage production over multiple growing seasons, particularly if you're dealing with a perennial forage, which is what we're dealing with here. And so we're testing these ideas in 3 field experiments at the UNH research farms. The first experiment we're conducting at Kingman Research Farm. And in this experiment, we're testing and comparing mixtures that contain either 1, 3, or 6 cultivars in a mixture. In the second study, which is being done at Woodman Research Farm, we're essentially asking, are there more benefits with more cultivars? So if you increase the mixture even beyond 6, you continue to get benefits in terms of productivity or stability. And then the third experiment, which is being conducted at the Organic Dairy Research Farm, is taking a slightly different question and saying, can we develop mixtures in a purposeful manner? If we know something about the traits of those cultivars, can we tailor mixtures for certain purposes? Okay? So all related questions, but with some somewhat different emphasis. So I'm going to show you the results from each of these experiments now. And again, just the highlights, and if you want to know the details, we can talk after this. So this is the data from the first experiment. This is averaged across 2 growing seasons. This is the number of cultivars in the mixture of these different treatments. It's important to note that all of the mixtures have the same total seeding rate. All we've changed are the numbers of cultivars that are in that mix, right? And interestingly, just simply by increasing the number of cultivars in the mixture from 1 to 6, we saw a 39% increase in dry matter production. So forage productivity, 39% increase just by increasing from 1 to 6. So that's pretty exciting. The second experiment, where we're asking, do you get more benefits if you add even more cultivars? This is the one at Woodman. So this panel on the left, this is showing the dry matter production as a function of the number of cultivars in the mixture. This experiment is a little bit different in that we're picking from a group of 13 possible cultivars. So for example, this 4 cultivar mixture here might contain a different group of cultivars than this 4 cultivar mixture. So that's kind of a random draw that's making up each of these mixtures all the way up to 10 mixtures. And you can see as you go from 4 to 6 to 10 cultivars in a mixture, we're seeing an increasing trend in productivity. What's really interesting is this panel on the left, where we calculated a yield index. This yield index is basically taking our productivity from the monocultures, the single cultivar mixtures, and predicting what we should see in each of these higher level mixtures. So if the data line up on this 1 at 1, that means we're seeing productivity exactly what you would expect based on the yield of the monocultures, right? So we're not getting a benefit. If it's below 1, we're actually getting a negative effect of the mixtures. They're actually suppressing the growth of each other, and we're seeing lower productivity than we would expect. And if we have it above 1, then we're getting some synergistic effects, some synergistic interactions among the cultivars. And you can see as we increase the number of cultivars in the mixture, the trend is for more of these synergistic interactions. So we're seeing higher productivity than you would expect based on the composition of that mixture. So that's really exciting. And again, all the mixtures have the same total seeding rate. The only thing we're playing with is the number of cultivars in these mixtures. Lastly, this idea, can we take information about the traits of these different cultivars and build mixtures for certain purposes? That's the idea behind this last experiment. And the traits that we're concentrating on for this study are winter hardiness and heading date. So we're trying to build mixtures around these 2 traits. And so I'll explain what I mean here. So we have a control. We call it T1. This is basically the recommended cultivar. This is if you went to the seed dealer and said, I'm going to plant perennial ryegrass in my pasture. What cultivar should I use? This is probably the cultivar that they would recommend. It has a certain range in heading date. It has a certain range in terms of winter hardiness, right? Our next treatment, we're asking, okay, what happens if we expand the range in terms of heading date? So we've got that same cultivar, but now we've added 2 additional cultivars that have earlier and later heading dates. So we've expanded the heading date range, and we've also slightly increased the winter hardiness in this particular mixture. So we've got a total of 3. Again, seeding rates are being held constant. It's the same seeding rate. We're just changing the cultivars. The next mixture, we're saying, what happens if we expand the heading date even more? And as a consequence, we're also expanding winter hardiness a bit. And now this one has 5 cultivars. Next treatment is kind of a shotgun mixture where we're expanding both heading date and winter hardiness to some degree. Next one, we're holding winter hardiness constant. So we're not expanding that trait, but we are expanding the heading date range with 5 cultivars, again, including that original recommended cultivar. We have a commercial blend. So a blend is basically a cultivar mixture. And there are commercial blends out there, and so we wanted to test that. So that's kind of another type of control. And then we have this last mixture, we call it T7, where we're holding heading date constant, but we're expanding the range of winter hardiness. So those are the mixtures, right? So we're very purposefully trying to expand either heading dates or winter hardiness or both to see if we can make these more productive and if we can have any influence on kind of the stability over time of these stands. So the data I'm going to show you here, I'm going to present in a slightly different way. Any points that lie along this line that go this way, those indicate that they're more productive. Any points down here means it's more stable. If it's up here, it's less stable. Here's how those mixtures fall out. I'll point you to our control. This is the recommended cultivar. It was our least stable cultivar, so it was very variable from site to site and year to year. Mixture 5 was also low in terms of stability, and it was also very poor in terms of yield, so was 6. Oops, sorry. Mixtures 2, 3, and 4, these were our best mixtures, right? So they were low, they were very stable, and they were also highly productive, right? So I see I'm running out of time. Just to summarize, forage cultivar mixtures appear to be a low-tech, low-input, potentially low-cost, though we haven't done the economics on this, approach to enhancing forage crop production. And it does appear that you can use trait information to design these cultivar mixtures for your given purpose, right? And that they may be resilient to climate variability. So I'll just acknowledge all the many folks that have helped with these projects, our funding from the Ag Experiment Station and from some other programs, and I will entertain any questions if I have time, which I probably don't. Oh, I do. All right.
You have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, was that perennial rye? What were the cultivars you were using?
Remington was the kind of control cultivar. That's the recommended.
Were these all perennial rye cultivars?
These were all perennial ryegrass. I must have zoomed through the slide where I actually said that. So the idea, we're working with perennial ryegrass, right? And we're using it kind of as our model system. But the ideas that we're testing with perennial ryegrass, we think those apply to any forage species. We just happen to be using perennial ryegrass because we can get our hands on a whole bunch of different cultivars of that. Sorry about that. Yep.
That was going to be my question is how many cultivars are available for some of these species? I mean, some of them are fairly limited.
Well, that is the limitation, right? So we chose perennial ryegrass because we could get a lot of cultivars. I think there's maybe 100 or so or more of those cultivars available. We could get our hands on about 14 of those for our purposes. Orchard grass, various cultivars. So the key is to have multiple cultivars that you can get your hands on, and that might be the limitation for certain forage species, maybe not so much for others. But, you know, these data suggest that maybe we need to start making more cultivars available, right? So all these cultivars have come about as breeding efforts in other countries or other regions of the United States. And so if we really do see these benefits by mixing cultivars at the stand level, then maybe we need to make, you know, for forage species that there aren't a whole lot of cultivars available, maybe we should see if we can make those more available.